Lucas Vaughn adjusted the visor of his mining helmet, the sharp glare from the surrounding machinery reflecting off his goggles. The colony of Parsec 12 wasn't exactly paradise. It was a cold, barren planet covered in endless stretches of gray rock, with jagged cliffs that loomed over narrow mining tunnels. But for Lucas, it was home. For now, at least. The paycheck was steady, and the isolation gave him plenty of time to think. Not that there was much to think about besides the monotony of his work. Today, like most days, he was deep underground, running maintenance on a failing power drill. The machine, a bulky piece of equipment that hummed with raw energy, had stopped functioning mid-operation. The team relied on it to break through the dense mineral veins beneath the planet's surface. "Come on, you piece of junk," Lucas muttered, jamming a tool into the access panel. Sparks flew, and the machine sputtered to life before dying again. "Vaughn, how's it looking down there?" crackled a voice through his earpiece. "Not great," Lucas replied, wiping sweat from his brow despite the cold air. "Tell the boss we're going to need a replacement part. This thing's toast." Suddenly, a deep rumble echoed through the tunnel. Lucas froze. It wasn't the normal sound of distant mining equipment. It was heavier, almost alive. The ground beneath his boots trembled slightly. "Did anyone else feel that?" Lucas asked, his voice uneasy. "Nope. Just you, Vaughn. Maybe it's time to lay off the coffee," someone joked over the comms. But Lucas wasn't laughing. The tremor grew stronger, and before he could react, the walls of the tunnel began to crack. Dust rained down in thick clouds as the ceiling groaned. Then came the sound Lucas dreaded most, the deafening roar of collapsing rock. "Cave in," Lucas yelled, diving for cover as boulders and debris crashed down around him. His head struck something hard, and the world went black. When Lucas opened his eyes, he was buried under a pile of rubble. His helmet light flickered weakly, illuminating the confined space around him. His chest felt heavy, and his left leg throbbed with pain, pinned beneath a chunk of rock. "Vaughn to base," he rasped into his comm. "I'm trapped." "Repeat, I'm trapped. Need assistance." Static. He tried again, but the signal was dead. Panic clawed at him as he realized how deep underground he was. The air was already growing thin. He struggled to free his leg, but the pain was unbearable. "Stay calm, Lucas," he told himself, his voice trembling. "Someone will come. They have to." Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. The darkness closed in, and Lucas fought to stay awake. Just when despair began to take hold, a faint blue light appeared in the distance. At first, he thought it was his mind playing tricks on him, but the light grew brighter, cutting through the gloom. Then he heard it, a soft, melodic voice, speaking in a language he couldn't understand. The sound was soothing, almost otherworldly. Lucas squinted as the light approached, revealing a figure unlike anything he had ever seen. She was tall and slender, with skin that shimmered like polished silver under the glow of her bioluminescent aura. Her eyes, large and almond-shaped, glowed faintly with a hue of violet. Her hair, if it could be called that, floated around her head like strands of liquid light. Lucas blinked, wondering if he was hallucinating. But the alien woman knelt beside him, her expression calm yet concerned. She placed a hand on his shoulder, and a wave of warmth spread through his body. Somehow, he felt safe. Who are you?" he managed to whisper. She tilted her head, as if considering how to answer. Then, in halting but clear English, she said, "Leray, I help you." Before Lucas could respond, Leray pressed a slender device to the boulder pinning his leg. The device emitted a low hum, and the rock disintegrated into fine dust. Lucas stared in awe as she gently pulled him free, her movements precise and deliberate. "Thank you," he said, wincing as she examined his injuries. Leray didn't reply immediately. Instead, she placed her hands above his leg, and a soft light emanated from her palms. The pain subsided, replaced by a tingling sensation. Lucas watched in disbelief as his wounds began to heal before his eyes. "You're not human," he said, stating the obvious. Lyrae nodded. "I, the Xianthian. Diplomat. Here, observe. Diplomat. On a mining colony." She smiled faintly. "You're kind. Interesting." Lucas wasn't sure whether to be flattered or confused. Before he could ask more, Lyrae stood and motioned for him to follow. Despite his exhaustion, he pushed himself to his feet, leaning on her for support. "Why are you helping me?" he asked as they navigated the debris. Lyrae paused, her glowing eyes meeting his. "Because you worth saving." Her words lingered in Lucas's mind as they made their way out of the tunnel. For the first time in years, he felt something stir within him. Something beyond survival, beyond duty. It was a feeling he couldn't quite name, but he knew one thing for certain. This encounter was only the beginning. Lucas Vaughn stared out the window of the small medical bay on Parsec 12, his leg wrapped in a bandage. The artificial sunlight streaming through the reinforced glass didn't feel warm, but it reminded him he was still alive. And he owed that life to her. Lyrae. The name echoed in his mind like a song he couldn't forget. He could still see her glowing violet eyes, the way her hands moved with precision, healing wounds no human doctor could. But what struck him most wasn't her abilities, or even her otherworldly appearance. It was her kindness. She had risked so much for him, a human she barely knew. "Hey, Vaughn." A voice snapped him out of his thoughts. Lucas turned to see his coworker, Greg, leaning against the doorway. "You're a lucky guy, you know that. Surviving a cave-in like that. Heard it was some alien who pulled you out." Lucas hesitated. "Yeah, her name's Lyrae." Greg raised an eyebrow. "Lyrae? They're saying she's some kind of diplomat. Don't get too cozy, though. Those are Xianthians. They don't mix with us. Too proud or something." Lucas shrugged, not wanting to argue. He wasn't sure what to think either. All he knew was that he couldn't stop thinking about her. Later that evening, Lucas found himself walking to the central dome of the colony, a massive structure where meetings, trade deals, and other official business took place. He didn't know why he was going there. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe he just wanted to see her again. The dome was buzzing with activity when he arrived. Xianthian delegates moved gracefully through the crowd, their shimmering forms standing out against the rough, practical uniforms of the humans. The air was filled with the hum of different languages, but Lucas's eyes searched for one figure. And then he saw her. Lyrae stood near the center of the room, her silvery skin catching the light. She was speaking to a group of humans, her voice calm and measured. When she saw Lucas, her gaze lingered for a moment before she excused herself and walked toward him. "You, well?" she asked, her English still hesitant but clear. Lucas nodded. "Thanks to you." He hesitated, then added, "I owe you my life." Lyrae tilted her head slightly, a gesture he was beginning to recognize as thoughtful. "No debt. Helping you. Right thing." There was a pause, and Lucas found himself searching for words. "Why are you here? On this colony, I mean." "Observe," Lyrae replied. "Learn about humans. Your ways. Different." He chuckled. "Yeah, I bet we seem pretty chaotic to you." Lyrae's lips curved into a faint smile. "Chaotic, yes, but also strong. Creative. You surprise us." Her words caught him off guard. "Surprise you how?" "Your will," she said softly. "Even in darkness, you fight. Never give up. This, rare." Lucas wasn't sure how to respond. He wanted to ask her 100 questions about her people, her world, why she cared so much about humans. But before he could, a sharp voice interrupted them. "Lyrae." They turned to see another Xianthian approaching, his posture rigid and his tone cold. He was taller than Lyrae, his skin a darker shade of silver. Lucas guessed he was someone important. Zathar, Lyrae said, her tone neutral. Zathar's glowing eyes flicked to Lucas. You are fraternizing with humans again. This is unwise. Lucas felt a spark of irritation. I'm standing right here, you know. Zathar ignored him, focusing on Lyrae. The council has made it clear. Our presence here is for observation and diplomacy, not personal connections. Lyrae's expression didn't change, but Lucas sensed a tension in her stance. Helping him was necessary. And now it is finished, Zathar said sharply. Do not forget your place, Lyrae. With that, he turned and walked away. Lucas watched him leave, his jaw tight. Friendly guy, he muttered. Lyrae sighed, her gaze dropping for a moment. Zathar follows rules. Xanthian way. Strict. Seems like more than just rules, Lucas said carefully. He didn't look too happy about you talking to me. Lyrae hesitated, then said, humans and Xanthians, not same. Bonds, not allowed. Lucas felt a pang of frustration. Why? What's so wrong about us working together? Or being friends? Lyrae looked at him, her eyes searching his face as if trying to find the right words. Fear, she said finally. Long ago. Wars. Pain. Trust. Broken. Now, rules protect us. Keep peace. Lucas wanted to argue, but he could see the weight of those words in her expression. He sighed. So you're stuck following rules that don't make sense anymore. Lyrae didn't reply, but the flicker of emotion in her eyes told him he wasn't entirely wrong. Over the next few days, Lucas and Lyrae crossed paths more often. Their conversations were brief, but each one left Lucas wanting to know more. He learned that Lyrae had chosen to study humans despite the disapproval of many in her society. She was curious about them, about what made them so unpredictable, yet so determined. For Lucas, the more he talked to Lyrae, the more he realized how different she was from anyone he'd ever met. She wasn't just intelligent, she was thoughtful, compassionate, and brave. And she saw something in him that he wasn't sure he deserved. But he also knew their connection wasn't without risk. Zathar's warning echoed in his mind, and he could only imagine what Lyrae might face if her people saw their growing friendship as a threat. Still, as Lucas watched Lyrae walking away after another quiet conversation, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of something far bigger than either of them. And for the first time in years, he found himself hoping for more. The colony buzzed with activity as the day of the diplomatic summit arrived. Humans and Xanthians gathered in the central dome, their differences stark yet oddly harmonious. Humans with their rough uniforms and practical mannerisms mingled with the elegant, glowing forms of Xanthians. The air was tense but hopeful. A fragile alliance was at stake, and both sides knew it. Lucas Vaughn adjusted the collar of his clean, albeit slightly wrinkled, shirt. He wasn't used to this kind of setting. Mining tunnels didn't prepare anyone for formal diplomacy, but he had volunteered to assist the summit staff. Deep down, he knew why. He hoped to see Lyrae again. He didn't have to wait long. Lyrae entered the dome alongside her delegation, her shimmering presence commanding quiet respect. Lucas couldn't help but smile as their eyes met across the room. Though she remained professional, her faint nod in his direction didn't go unnoticed. The summit began with speeches. Human officials spoke about cooperation, resource sharing, and a peaceful future. Xanthian leaders responded with careful words, their voices melodic yet measured. As Lucas listened, he found himself distracted. His gaze kept drifting to Lyrae, who stood near the front, her focus unwavering. After the speeches, the room broke into smaller discussions. Lucas busied himself with logistical tasks, but his mind was elsewhere. He finally spotted an opportunity when Lyrae stepped away from the group, heading toward a quiet alcove. Lyrae, he called softly, approaching her. She turned, her expression softening as she saw him. Lucas, you? Here for summit. Sort of. Mostly just helping with setup, he admitted. But I wanted to check on you. Things seemed tense back there. Luray glanced back toward the main hall, her glowing eyes dimming slightly. Tense, yes. Many. Doubts. Humans and Xianthians. Trust takes time. Time we might not have, Lucas said, lowering his voice. It feels like both sides are just waiting for the other to mess up. Luray nodded. Old wounds. Fear. Hard to heal. Lucas hesitated before asking, "What about you? Do you think this can work?" Her gaze met his, and for a moment, the noise of the summit seemed to fade. "I believe it can. Humans. Worth knowing. Worth trusting." The sincerity in her voice caught Lucas off guard. He smiled. "I'm glad you think so." Before they could say more, a sharp voice cut through the air. "Luray." Both of them turned to see Zathar approaching, his expression colder than ever. He glanced at Lucas, his disapproval clear, before addressing Luray. "The High Council has noticed your interactions," Zathar said, his tone icy. "You are drawing attention, and not the good kind." Luray's posture straightened. "I do my duty. Talking to humans. Part of that." "Talking, yes," Zathar said, his glowing eyes narrowing. "But this is beyond acceptable. You risk undermining our mission." Lucas stepped forward, his frustration boiling over. "She's not doing anything wrong. Maybe if you actually listened to her, you'd see that." Zathar's gaze shifted to him, unyielding. "Human, you speak of things you do not understand. Our laws exist for a reason. Relationships with your kind are dangerous, short-sighted, and destructive." Lucas clenched his fists. "Dangerous? How?" "Because we're different. Because your kind is unpredictable," Zathar replied sharply. "Emotional. Reckless. History has proven this." "That's not fair," Lucas shot back. "Maybe we're not perfect, but that doesn't mean we're not worth trusting. Isn't that why we're here? To prove we can work together." Zathar ignored him and turned back to Luray. "You would do well to remember your place. Luray, the Council watches closely. Do not give them a reason to question your loyalty." With that, he walked away, leaving a heavy silence behind. Lucas exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "That guy's unbelievable." "Zathar follows rules," Luray said quietly, though her voice carried a hint of frustration. "Yeah, well, some rules are meant to be broken," Lucas muttered. Luray looked at him, her expression thoughtful. "Not all see it that way. Xianthians fear change. Fear losing what they are." "And what about you?" Lucas asked. "Do you fear it?" She hesitated before shaking her head. "No. I see potential." "You? Remind me why we try." Her words warmed something deep inside him. "Thanks, Luray. That means a lot." The rest of the summit passed uneventfully, but Lucas couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. Later that evening, as the crowd dispersed, Luray found him near the supply station. "Lucas," she said softly. He turned, surprised. "Luray? Everything okay?" She nodded but seemed hesitant. "I'd want to thank you for speaking for me." "You don't have to thank me," Lucas said, smiling. "I just told the truth." She stepped closer, her glowing eyes meeting his. "Truth, dangerous. But you, brave." Lucas felt his heart race. "Well, maybe I just learned it from someone brave too." Her lips curved into the faintest smile, but before she could respond, a chime sounded from her communicator. "I must go," she said, her voice tinged with regret. "Summit continues tomorrow." Lucas nodded. "Yeah, tomorrow." As she walked away, he couldn't help but feel that their connection, however fragile, was becoming something neither of them could ignore. The next morning, Lucas found himself in the colony's central dome again, this time overseeing the final logistics for the summit's second day. The Xianthians were known for their punctuality, and true to form, their delegation arrived precisely at the scheduled time. Luray walked in with her usual grace, her silvery form glowing softly under the artificial lights. Lucas wanted to approach her, but the air in the dome felt heavier today. Something was wrong. The human officials seemed more guarded, their whispers tense. The Scienthians, too, exchanged looks that carried unspoken concern. Lucas caught snippets of conversations. Words like incident and sabotage floated through the air. "What's going on?" he asked Greg, who was stacking equipment nearby. Greg shrugged, his expression grim. "Heard there was an explosion at one of the supply depots last night. No one's saying much, but both sides are pointing fingers." Lucas's stomach tightened. The peace talks were already fragile. An attack could shatter them completely. As the summit began, the tension was palpable. Human and Scienthian representatives sat on opposite sides of the long table, their polite smiles masking unease. A human official, Governor Reed, spoke first. "We've received reports of an explosion at Supply Depot Alpha. While no lives were lost, significant damage was done to critical resources. We have reason to believe this was an act of sabotage." Murmurs spread through the room. Zafar, sitting among the Scienthians, raised a hand for silence. "Sabotage is a serious accusation, Governor. Do you have evidence?" Reed hesitated. "We're still investigating, but traces of foreign technology were found at the site. Technology that matches Scienthian designs." The room erupted into protests from both sides. Lyrae sat quietly, her expression unreadable, but her hands clenched the edges of the table. Zafar stood, his voice calm but firm. "We categorically deny any involvement in such an act. Giants value peace. To suggest otherwise is an insult to our integrity." Reed's gaze hardened. "Then perhaps you can explain how your technology ended up at the scene." Lucas watched from the sidelines, his mind racing. This wasn't just an accident. Someone was trying to sabotage the talks, but who? And why? Later that evening, Lucas found Lyrae standing alone in the observation deck, looking out at the barren landscape of Parsec 12. "Lyrae," he called softly. She turned, her face shadowed by worry. "Lucas, I heard what happened," he said, stepping closer. "This wasn't your people, was it?" She shook her head. "No. Gianthians do not act this way. Sabotage against our values." "I believe you," Lucas said, "but someone clearly doesn't want this alliance to happen. Do you have any idea who it could be?" Lyrae hesitated before speaking. "Some Gianthians fear humans. They think peace dangerous. But this, it feels different." Lucas frowned. "Different how?" "Too direct. Too reckless," she said. "If sabotage meant to cause distrust, it works. Both sides now question each other." Lucas ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "There has to be a way to prove this wasn't you. Something that shows both sides they're being played." Lyrae's glowing eyes met his. "Evidence. We must find truth before it's too late." The next day, Lucas and Lyrae worked together in secret. Using a handheld scanner borrowed from the colony's tech lab, they reviewed the debris from the supply depot. Lucas knelt beside a charred piece of equipment, holding the scanner steady. "This piece is definitely Scienthian tech," he said. Lyrae examined it closely. "Yes, but altered, not used as designed." "Sabotaged," Lucas said. "Someone's using your technology to frame your people." Lyrae nodded. "If we show this, both sides see truth." "But," she hesitated. "But what?" "Zafar," she said softly. "He will not approve. Scienthian Council, strict about revealing weakness. This could anger them." Lucas sighed. "We don't have a choice. If we don't act, this whole alliance falls apart. And you and I both know what happens next. War." Her expression grew somber, but she didn't argue. "Then we must act. Quickly." As the summit resumed, Lucas and Lyrae made their move. They interrupted a tense discussion between Zafar, and Governor Reed, presenting the altered Sciathian device as evidence. This proves someone's tampering with Sciathian technology to frame them. Lucas said, his voice steady. We can't let whoever did this destroy what we're trying to build here. Reed studied the evidence carefully, while Zathar's expression darkened. You overstep, human, Zathar said coldly. This matter is for Sciathians to address, and yet it affects all of us, Lucas countered. You can't just sweep this under the rug. Luray stepped forward, her voice calm but resolute. Lucas speaks truth. Hiding this helps no one. We must show we seek peace. For a moment, the room was silent. Then, Governor Reed nodded. If what you say is true, we need to work together to find who's responsible. Zathar looked as if he wanted to argue, but Luray's steady gaze stopped him. Finally, he nodded begrudgingly. Very well. We will investigate this. Together. That evening, Lucas and Luray stood outside the dome, looking up at the stars. We did it, Lucas said, a hint of relief in his voice. For now, Luray replied. But danger not over. Those who sabotage, still out there. Lucas nodded. Then we'll stop them. Together. She turned to him, her violet eyes filled with a mix of hope and uncertainty. Together, she said softly. As they stood there, side by side, Lucas couldn't help but feel that their fragile alliance was more than just about peace between their people. It was about something far deeper: trust, courage, and the belief that even the greatest divides could be bridged. Lucas paced the narrow corridor outside the central dome, his mind racing. The evidence he and Luray had uncovered had temporarily calmed tensions, but the real danger remained. Whoever was behind the sabotage wouldn't stop at one attack. Luray joined him moments later, her presence as calming as ever. You think about next move, she asked. Lucas nodded. Yeah, but it's a mess. If we're going to stop this, we need to figure out who's pulling the strings. And why. Luray's glowing violet eyes narrowed thoughtfully. Sabotage, not random. Someone gains from this chaos. Someone who wants humans and Sciathians at each other's throats, Lucas said. He crossed his arms. But who benefits from that? Before Luray could respond, Greg appeared, his face pale. Lucas, there's been another explosion. Lucas's heart sank. Where? Mining Sector B, Greg said. It wasn't just equipment this time. 2 workers are in critical condition. Luray's expression darkened. This, escalating. Whoever does this, grows bolder. Lucas clenched his fists. Then we need to stop them before someone else gets hurt. The mining sector was a mess. Smoke lingered in the air, and the faint smell of burnt machinery stung Lucas's nose. Human engineers and Sciathian technicians worked side by side to assess the damage, their usual distrust set aside in the face of urgency. Lucas crouched near the blast site, examining the debris. Same pattern as before, he muttered. Controlled explosion, designed to disable equipment but not destroy everything. Luray stood beside him, scanning the area with a handheld device. Energy signatures, same as last attack. Modified Sciathian tech, used again. Lucas frowned. Whoever's doing this has access to your people's technology. Could it be someone from your side? Luray hesitated. Possible, but not certain. Humans, also resourceful. Could steal, modify. Before Lucas could respond, a voice interrupted them. You shouldn't be here. They turned to see Zathar, his imposing form silhouetted against the dim light. His expression was as cold as ever. We're trying to figure out who's behind this, Lucas said, standing up. This is not your concern, Zathar replied sharply. He looked at Luray. And you should not involve yourself further. The council will handle this. Luray's eyes glowed faintly brighter, a subtle sign of defiance. The council. Slow. We must act now. Lives at risk. Your actions risk more than lives, Zathar said, his tone dangerous. They risk everything we have worked for. Lucas stepped forward. She's trying to help. We both are. Or do you want more people to get hurt while we sit around doing nothing? Zathar's glare shifted to Lucas, his disdain clear. You overestimate your importance, human. This is not your fight. No, it's everyone's fight. Lucas shot back. If this alliance falls apart, we all lose. Zathar didn't respond immediately. Instead, he looked at Luray, his expression softening slightly. You are loyal, Luray. Do not let misplaced trust cloud your judgment. With that, he turned and walked away, leaving them in tense silence. Later that evening, Lucas and Luray reviewed the data they'd collected. They worked in a small, quiet corner of the colony's tech lab, away from prying eyes. Look at this, Lucas said, pointing to a series of energy readings on the screen. These patterns, they don't match typical Scienthian tech. It's like someone's trying to mimic it, but didn't get it quite right. Luray studied the data, her expression thoughtful. You are correct. This, not pure Scienthian design. Hybrid. Someone combines human and Scienthian tech. Lucas leaned back in his chair, a knot forming in his stomach. So it could be anyone, a human, a Scienthian, or even a group working together. Luray nodded. Yes, and resources needed for this. Significant. Not random. Organized. Lucas rubbed his temples. We're dealing with professionals. Great. Their conversation was interrupted by a sudden commotion outside the lab. Voices shouted, and the faint hum of energy weapons filled the air. What now? Lucas muttered, standing up. Luray followed him as they stepped into the hallway. They saw a group of Scienthian security officers escorting a human in handcuffs. The man's face was bruised, and his uniform was stained with soot. That's one of the mining engineers, Lucas said, recognizing the man. A Scienthian officer addressed the growing crowd. This human was found tampering with restricted equipment. He is suspected of involvement in the recent attacks. The crowd erupted into murmurs. Lucas frowned, watching the scene unfold. Something didn't sit right. That's too convenient, he said to Luray. They're pinning this on one guy. Possible. Scapegoat. Luray agreed. We must investigate. That night, Lucas and Luray worked quickly. They accessed colony records, security footage, and personnel files. It didn't take long to find inconsistencies. Look at this, Lucas said, pointing to a timestamp log. The guy they arrested was on shift in another sector when the first attack happened. There's no way he could have done it. Luray's eyes glowed brighter with determination. Evidence clears him. But who planted it? Someone who wanted to shift blame onto humans, Lucas said. We need to show this to the council. Dangerous, Luray warned. If we fail, tensions grow worse. Lucas nodded. Then we can't fail. As dawn approached, Lucas and Luray prepared to present their findings. They knew the risk. If they were wrong, they'd lose what little trust they'd built. But if they were right, they might just save the fragile alliance. Standing together in the quiet before the storm, Lucas looked at Luray. We've got this. Right? She met his gaze, her voice steady. Together, we are stronger. And with that, they stepped into the unknown, ready to face whatever came next. Lucas and Luray stood in the council chamber, the tension as thick as the atmosphere outside the dome. Human and Scienthian representatives filled the room, their expressions ranging from cautious curiosity to outright suspicion. Zathar and Governor Reed sat at the head of the room, their sharp gazes fixed on the pair. Lucas cleared his throat, gripping the datapad tightly. We've discovered new evidence that proves the engineer you arrested is innocent. Reed frowned. And what exactly are you claiming, Mr. Harper? That the attacks were orchestrated by someone else, someone who wants to sabotage this alliance, Lucas replied. Murmurs spread through the room. Luray stepped forward, her calm voice cutting through the noise. This evidence clears the human. Shows real culprits using hybrid technology. She pressed a button on the data pad, projecting holograms of energy signatures, security logs, and schematics into the air. The patterns glowed faintly, their complexity undeniable. This technology, Lucas explained, isn't purely scientific or human. It's a mix of both. And if you look at these timestamps, you'll see that the arrested engineer couldn't have been at the site during the first explosion. Reed leaned forward, studying the holograms. If this is true, then who is responsible? Lucas hesitated. We don't know yet, but whoever it is, they have access to advanced resources and the ability to frame others. This isn't a small operation. Zathar's expression remained cold. You present theories and speculation, human, not proof. This evidence is proof. Lucas shot back, his frustration mounting. Someone's playing us, and if we don't stop them, this whole alliance will fall apart. The room erupted into arguments, with humans and Scienthians accusing each other of lies, and cover-ups realizing the divisions ran deeper than he'd imagined. Enough. Luray's voice rang out, quieting the room. She stepped into the center of the chamber, her violet eyes glowing brighter than ever. We argue, while enemy grows stronger. Unity, only way forward. Her words silenced the crowd, their weight impossible to ignore. Even Zathar seemed taken aback by her conviction. Governor Reed stood, addressing the room. We need to act quickly. If what they're saying is true, then the real threat is still out there. We need an investigation. Zathar nodded reluctantly. Agreed. But it must be impartial. Both sides will contribute resources and personnel. Lucas exhaled in relief. It wasn't a full victory, but it was a step forward. Later, Lucas and Luray sat in a quiet corner of the colony, exhaustion etched on their faces. That was intense, Lucas said, running a hand through his hair. Luray nodded. But progress. Small, but real. He looked at her, admiration in his eyes. You were amazing in there. The way you spoke, the way you handled Zathar. I don't think anyone else could have done that. She tilted her head, a faint smile on her lips. You, not so bad yourself. They shared a rare moment of levity, the weight of their mission momentarily lifted. But the reality of their situation quickly returned. What's our next move? Lucas asked. Luray's expression grew serious. Find who benefits from sabotage. Look deeper. Shadows often hide truth. Their investigation led them to the outskirts of the colony, where the industrial sector hummed quietly in the night. Lucas had always found the area eerie. Its towering machines and dim lights felt more like a graveyard than a hub of activity. We need to check the shipping logs, he said, gesturing to a large storage facility. If someone's smuggling hybrid tech, this is where it would be. Luray nodded, her senses sharp. Be careful. Shadows. Not always empty. They slipped inside the facility, their footsteps echoing softly. Rows of crates and containers loomed around them, their labels unreadable in the dim light. Lucas activated his handheld scanner, its soft glow casting eerie patterns on the walls. Look for anything unusual, he whispered. Luray moved silently through the rows, her glowing eyes scanning the darkness. Suddenly, she stopped, her head tilting slightly. Someone. Here, she whispered. Lucas froze. Where? Before she could answer, a shadow moved behind a nearby crate. Lucas barely had time to react before a figure lunged at him, knocking the scanner from his hands. Get down. Luray shouted, her voice sharp. Lucas hit the ground as a burst of energy whizzed past him, searing the air. Luray moved like a blur, disarming the attacker with precision. The figure fell to the ground, revealing a human in a dark uniform. Who are you? Lucas demanded, pulling himself up. The man didn't answer, his face a mask of defiance. Luray scanned him with her device, her expression darkening. He. Not alone, she said. As if on cue, More shadows emerged from the darkness. Lucas counted at least 5, their weapons trained on him and Luray. "Looks like we've got trouble," Lucas muttered. Luray's eyes glowed brighter, her calm voice filled with resolve. "Then, we fight." The room erupted into chaos. Luray moved with inhuman speed, her movements precise and fluid. Lucas, though slower, used his wits to stay ahead of their attackers, ducking behind crates and disarming one with a well-placed kick. "Who are these guys?" Lucas shouted over the noise. "Mercenaries," Luray replied, her voice steady despite the chaos. "Hired to silence us." Lucas's heart pounded as he fought off another attacker. Whoever was behind the sabotage wasn't just powerful, they were willing to kill to protect their secrets. Finally, the last mercenary fell, and the room fell silent. Lucas leaned against a crate, catching his breath. "That was too close," he said. Luray nodded, scanning the fallen attackers, but revealing. "Now we know. Enemy fears us." Lucas smirked, despite himself. "Guess we're doing something right." As they left the facility, carrying evidence from the attackers' equipment, Lucas felt a renewed sense of determination. The stakes were higher than ever, but he and Luray weren't backing down. The shadows might be closing in, but together, they would bring the truth to light. The council chamber was packed once again, but this time, the air crackled with anticipation. Humans and Xianthians sat shoulder to shoulder, their attention fixed on Lucas and Luray as they stood at the center of the room. Between them, a table displayed confiscated weapons, energy cells, and data drives retrieved from the mercenaries. Lucas took a deep breath, steadying himself. "We've found the proof." The attacks on the colony were not random acts of sabotage. They were deliberate, orchestrated by someone who wants to destroy the Alliance. Luray nodded, her violet eyes glowing faintly as she added, "And we know who." A murmur swept through the crowd. Zathar leaned forward, his sharp features etched with suspicion. "Speak plainly, Luray. Who is responsible?" Lucas stepped forward, holding up a holographic display. With a flick of his wrist, he projected the contents of the confiscated data drives. "This," he said, pointing to the screen, "is a communication log from the mercenaries we encountered. It shows they were hired by a group calling themselves the Shadow Accord, a faction made up of both humans and Xianthians who oppose the Alliance." The room erupted into chaos. Voices shouted over each other, accusations flying between the two sides. Lucas raised his hands, trying to restore order. "Wait," he shouted. "This isn't about blaming humans or Xianthians. It's about stopping a group that wants to divide us." Governor Reed stood, her voice cutting through the noise. "Quiet. Let them finish." The room fell silent, and Lucas continued. "The Shadow Accord doesn't care about peace. They profit from war and division. Their attacks were meant to make us distrust each other, to make us too angry to see the real threat." Luray stepped forward. "We have more proof. Equipment used in sabotage, hybrid design, resources stolen from both sides. They want us to fight, while they grow stronger." Zathar's expression darkened. "And how do you propose we deal with this threat?" Later that evening, Lucas and Luray worked with representatives from both sides to plan a coordinated strike. They had traced the Shadow Accord's main base to an abandoned asteroid mining facility on the edge of the system. "This won't be easy," Lucas said, studying the holographic map. "The base is heavily fortified. They're expecting us to come for them." Luray nodded, her tone firm. "But they do not expect us together, human and Xianthian, stronger as one." Zathar, who had begrudgingly joined their planning session, crossed his arms. "Your faith in unity is admirable, but we cannot afford to fail. If this mission goes wrong, the Alliance will be beyond repair." "It won't fail," Lucas said, his voice steady, "because we won't let it." The strike team consisted of both human soldiers and Xianthian warriors, their differences set aside in the face of a common enemy. As they approached the asteroid base, the tension was palpable. Lucas sat in the cockpit of the dropship, his hands gripping the controls. Beside him, Luray prepared her energy weapons, her calm focus a steadying presence. "You ready for this?" Lucas asked. She glanced at him, her faint smile reassuring. "Always." The dropship landed with a jolt, and the strike team poured out, their movements synchronized despite their mixed origins. Alarms blared as the Shadow Accord's defenses sprang to life. "Here we go," Lucas muttered, ducking behind cover as energy blasts lit up the dark corridors of the base. The battle was fierce, the Shadow Accord's mercenaries fighting with ruthless efficiency, but the combined strength of the human and Sciathian forces proved to be their undoing. Lucas and Luray moved together through the chaos, their teamwork seamless. Luray's precision and speed complemented Lucas's resourcefulness, each watching the other's back. "Clear," Lucas shouted as they breached a control room. Inside, they found a network terminal, its screen displaying encrypted files. Luray plugged in her device, her fingers flying across the interface. "Hurry," Lucas urged, keeping an eye on the door. "Almost done," Luray replied, her voice steady despite the urgency. Finally, she pulled the device free. "Got it. All their plans, locations, everything." "Good," Lucas said. "Now let's get out of here." The strike team regrouped on the surface, their mission a success. The Shadow Accord's base lay in ruins, its leaders captured or fleeing into the void. As they returned to the colony, Lucas and Luray shared a rare moment of quiet. "We did it," Lucas said, his voice filled with relief. Luray nodded, her smile faint but genuine. Together, back at the colony, the evidence they had recovered from the base was enough to expose the Shadow Accord's remaining operatives and dismantle their network. The attack stopped, and trust between humans and Sciathians began to rebuild. At the next council meeting, Lucas and Luray were honored for their bravery. Even Zafar, though reluctant, acknowledged their contribution. "You have proven," he said, "that unity is not weakness, it is strength." As the colony settled into a new era of cooperation, Lucas and Luray found themselves standing together under the stars. "We changed things," Lucas said, his voice soft. Luray looked at him, her eyes glowing faintly. "Yes, but journey not over. Always more to build, together." Lucas smiled, feeling a warmth he hadn't known in a long time. "I wouldn't have it any other way." And as the stars shone down on the colony, the promise of a brighter future seemed closer than ever.